Welcome to Cyber Savvy. This podcast was created by DTC to bring awareness, mitigation, and response to cybersecurity threats companies and organizations face daily. Be prepared. Be cyber savvy. Good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, wherever you are on the planet. Thank you for lending us your ears today. We have a special treat this morning. Scott Leister is joining us. He is one of DTC's senior engineers, and he recently gave a presentation to a dental study club on ransomware, and I'm thrilled this morning to have him here to answer a few questions. And Scott, before we get started, have you always been interested in IT prior to coming to work for DTC?
I had just started in the IT industry a couple of years prior to coming to work to DTC. I had worked in actually a motorcycle dealership for about 10 years and just decided that it wasn't leading me anywhere and IT was an interest of mine. So I pursued that.
So how long have you been at DTC?
21 years. I'm working on number 22 right now.
So I don't know, does that make you employee number what?
One. Employee number one.
Congratulations. That's
Oh,
a big
thank you.
deal. And especially in this industry, to stay at one organization this long and within this industry itself, which has a whole nother layer of stressors. Coming from the motorcycle industry, what similarities did you see when you first started working for DTC?
Well, the biggest relatable experience is just the customer service aspect of just being able to speak to people and try to relate to them about what you're doing, why you're doing it, and hopefully what is in their best interest.
Well, you hope so. You know, it's kind of common knowledge within the IT industry that when someone calls you, it's never to tell you how great of a job you're doing. It's usually to say something is wrong and they need an urgent fix and they have no time left to do that. So I give you a lot of credit for keeping that even keeled demeanor as well when you're dealing with folks. The discussion you gave at the study club, I don't want to steal a whole lot of your thunder, but it was related to cybersecurity. And prior to kind of digging into that, why don't you describe fully what is your role with DTC now? And how has it evolved and expanded over the years?
Currently, my newly given title is going to be like DevSecOps engineer. So that's a mouthful. We were really struggling because I touched so many different things and am exploring different avenues that we're trying to condense it into something that was at least descriptive. So what that entails is I do a lot of the back end scripting, automation. I look at the alerts. I do a lot of product vetting and testing. And also, I'm more heavily invested into the security side at DTC too. Like what products we use, what policies do we practice, how do we go about securing our clients' data and their networks, and also testing out and vetting those products and those companies that do those security products.
It's a big deal. You know, it's back in the day, IT just meant making sure that all the things were plugged in correctly and talking to each other. But now IT has taken on a whole nother level with cybersecurity risks that are out there. Just briefly, can you explain maybe since you've started at DTC to where we are today, how has that changed?
Well, you had just referenced it that the originally when I was starting, you're right. It's just put the server in, make sure the workstations talk to it, and hope the software works. And that was about the end of it. And now everything is moving up to the cloud and the constant need to access your data 24/7 on any kind of device. You know, like the Internet of Things has been a huge driver of that with smartphones, tablets. We constantly get requests that I need to check tomorrow's schedule from my cell phone wherever I'm at. And some of that comes overseas. So as you expand that footprint, obviously your security needs to be tighter because there's a lot more holes in there because of that availability of that data. And it is constantly increasing in complexity, just the whole IT side of things. Just look at the recent boom in cybersecurity. There are so many different avenues just to cybersecurity alone. It's interesting because like a lot of the applicants that we have coming in looking for jobs, all of them want to do cybersecurity. I have a son who's graduating from Penn State, who's graduating with a cybersecurity degree. And I'm like, well, what do you want to do in there? There's like, 800 jobs you can do in cybersecurity alone. So that gives a good indication of what we're dealing with in today's world of just trying to secure your information.
Yeah, and broadly speaking, I don't think there's any industry or sector it doesn't touch. Given your tenure at DTC, I'm sure you've seen a few cybersecurity incidences. Are there any in particular that you're at liberty to just discuss, whether it's anonymized or otherwise, that really stick out in your mind?
Well, probably the very first one that we ran into was ransomware, our very first run in with ransomware. And that was terrifying. I think I lost sleep for a week over that because it is unnerving. Now, this was back in the days where you couldn't just go buy Bitcoin for whatever amount you had. It was limited to a certain dollar amount per day that you could purchase. So it took us a few days to accumulate the amount of Bitcoin. And when you're sending, at that time, it was, I don't remember the amount, but it's not like the totals you see today. But still, it was $500, $1,000. And you hit send and you're praying that it works because you have no guarantee that you're going to get the code back that's actually going to decrypt your data. And unfortunately, this situation was one where client had data hidden on a funked server that we were unaware of. So it was outside of the backup scope and it was pretty critical data. So that way we ended up paying for the ransom for our client. And then we've also had other instances. We had another instance where a client put a device in that was storing x-rays that we were unaware of. And that had actually was the computer that got the ransomware. So we actually ended up paying that ransom too to decrypt it. But that is always stand out in my mind because that was my very first experience with ransomware. And up until that point, our experience with spyware and stuff was random pop-ups on desktop computers. And now this was a whole new ballgame. And we knew that the world is different now. And it was scary. And there's been a couple other instances, like even I've had personal experiences with the imposter scams. And it was very interesting because of some personal issues with credit card fraud and stolen bank card. And actually, they had my PIN as well, where it was like over $1,000 were charged within a couple of days on that. The imposter actually came across as, you can spoof any phone number, is it came across as the bank's number. And I even verified the number while they were on the phone just to make sure it was the bank. And they said it was the fraud department. And I got along the track where basically they were trying to get me to use like one of the payment apps, Zelle, to send them money. And because of my recent experience of the credit card fraud, I was convinced that this was real. And it really opened my eyes to how they play on your emotions in these scams that get you wrapped up where all rational thought, leaves your mind. And once the emotion left, then my logic started coming in, and then I started thinking about what was going on. And then I'm like, yeah, there's a lot of red flags here that I missed prior because of my emotional, like, this is real because, well, here we go again, my credit card's stolen again. That it took a while for me to realize that, yeah, I'm being scammed. And it's just, it is scary how ubiquitous these scams are, and especially all the malicious actors out there that feed on social engineering and emotion to get people hooked into believing that what they are offering and what they are saying is real.
And the fact that someone like you could almost fall prey to something like that speaks to the sophistication that these threat actors utilize. This leads us nicely. So recently you did a presentation to a study club. What was the presentation? And can you talk a little bit about maybe a summary and what some of the takeaways were?
Yeah, so basically, Kevin McNamara, who's the lead account manager, and I did a present. We had a PowerPoint presentation. The PowerPoint slides just basically carried a brief description of what we were going to discuss, but then we drove the conversation, and it covered pretty much common cyber threats, a lot of the tools that are out there, like what they're looking for, the specifics on what data and information they're looking to mine, how some of that has changed over the years. And then plus, like mitigation techniques and some strategies to try to recover from an incident that occurs. And then since it is dental, we did touch on HIPAA, how it applies to some compliance standards. And then we also touched briefly on cyber liability insurance and why we feel it is a necessity in today's business environment.
Crucial topics. One of the things here, I was provided a list of questions of things to ask you, and there's one on here that I do want to ask you, and it says, why does DTC prefer zero trust over VPN?
That's a great question. I have a t-shirt that I got, a zero trust vendor, that says friends don't let friends use VPNs. And it always generates conversation because everybody's familiar with a VPN. And the VPN is actually a configuration where the zero trust is a model. It's more of a constant evolving process, but it's a design model. So the VPN is basically a virtual private network that extends your network to the device you're connecting from. So if Mary wants to connect from her house using a VPN, the local network at the office now extends out to her computer. And any issues, if her computer is compromised, that now is a part of the business network. Where the zero trust model, specifically in regards to remote access, is you only allow access to the resources that they need. So you are not a part of the network. If you only need access to a piece of software, that is all you have access to, is that piece of software. You don't have access to the rest of the network or any computers or any other software. So the zero trust model it's really emerged here in the past few years as the preferred way of doing things, because prior it used to be trust but verify. But now this is, we don't trust anybody. You need to prove that you need access, and then we'll grant it.
It's a much smarter way to do it. It's unfortunate that we've gotten to this point, but I mean, it's pragmatic. And given the amount of threats that are out there and the velocity they're coming in at, we need to make sure that we don't trust anybody. A couple more broad questions here for our listeners out there. What are a couple things a business owner or person can do to better secure their business? And then also, how would DTC help with these things?
I see as the number one that a business should look at doing is training their employees just through phishing and cyber security awareness, because the human factor is still the number one target and the easiest in to a business, just through social engineering, phishing schemes. I mean, look at MGM Grand last year. That was just a call to help desk. Hey, I need to reset my password. Okay, here you go. And took down their all MGM brand. So, I mean, to me, that is the number one thing that people should be doing. Another thing that we really stress now, and it's a part of our contract, is that we require our clients to carry cyber liability insurance. It's just a great way to protect yourself because stuff is going to happen. You do your best, but everything's constantly evolving. And if something does happen, it would be nice to be able to open your doors the next day. So we do stress that. And plus, that opens up a lot of resources for you to help deal with the fallout of an incident. The third thing is, if MFA is available, and it should be, then use it, which is multi-factor authentication. You should be using multi-factor authentication on everything. And if a product doesn't offer it, get another product. Because in today's day and age, you always need multiple ways of authenticating your access and preventing somebody else from easily doing it. And even there's phishing resistant multi-factor authentication methods out there, which, like with hardware keys and biometrics and that kind of stuff. And then just a simple one that always gets overlooked that a lot of people don't even think about, that I always recommend, is just to protect, is just put an ad blocker on your browser, on your computer. It is amazing how many ads, like when you use Google, are phishing sites. Like you look up Microsoft support or whatever, and you get a list of sponsored or high-end stuff that are not Microsoft support. An ad blocker will block most of that stuff for you, and it doesn't cost you anything, except if you want to donate to whoever's making it, which I always recommend if it's a good product. And how DTC implements some of this stuff, well, a lot of it we use is products, but we also have standardization for the way we design our networks. We try to segregate items into different virtual networks. So that way, like the servers are different from the backups. So that way the backups are on a different network and that traffic only goes one way. And then the workstations are on a different virtual network from the servers, just to obscure some of the way the networks are laid out. And then plus, you have security products like DNS filtering, obviously AV. We're into now like endpoint detection and response. But not only do we offer products and services, but our account managers are out on quarterly business reviews, having discussions with our clients on how they can secure their businesses and what's needed, and really driving the conversation. And that really opens our eyes to what the landscape looks like and what we need to do to try to constantly evolve and change to keep up with it, to secure our clients.
Well, I tell you, for those of you listening, this is a valuable topic, and it would benefit your study club or your conference to bring Scott and Kevin in to have a conversation about some of these things. Scott, if somebody wanted to reach out to you and see if you're available to speak at their study club, what's the best way to reach you?
For that would be go through Kevin, because Kevin organizes all that, and that's kevin.mcnamara@dtctoday.com is his email address. So he's, like I said, the lead count manager, and he drives all the leads coming for that. So that would be the best one. Or we also have a sales@dtctoday.com email address, which a request can come in through that and it will get sent to the correct people.
And what we'll do is we'll put this information also in the narrative below this podcast for those of you who did not catch that URL. Scott, one more question for you. Do you have a pet? And if so, what kind of pet do you have?
I have a dog, and it is a mini golden doodle. And it is
the
an
dog's
amazing
name
dog.
is
Adeline.
Adeline. Wow. And do you call her Addie or do you call her Adeline?
We call her Addie, unless she's in trouble. Then it's Adeline.
That's phenomenal. Well, listen, I appreciate you taking your time away from the engineering duties that you have at DTC, and I appreciate having employee number one on our podcast today to talk about their wonderful presentation that they do for dental study clubs. So again, listeners, should you want to bring in Scott and Kevin to have a conversation to your group about some of the threats that we have today and ways to mitigate and respond to them, we would love to hear from you. So please do reach out at sales@dtctoday.com or look for the information below in our podcast. Scott, thank you very much for joining us today.
All right, well, thank you for having me.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for joining us today on our podcast. And today we have a very salient topic for those of you business owners out there who are looking at your insurance policy renewals, exploring getting a cyber insurance policy to begin with. You will notice that the checklists have become both voluminous as well as fairly significant in what they're requesting. Some of this might appear to be jargon that you're not as familiar with as some of our experts here, but fortunately we've got Mike Urbanik and Scott Leister to talk a little bit about some of these intricacies and what do they really mean. So Mike, I'll let you introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? And then I'll let you take it from there.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. My name is Mike Urbanik. I work with RK Tongue, and I'm an insurance agent there. RK Tongue is an insurance broker working with businesses of all types, but predominantly, I'll say white collar businesses, CPAs, dental firms, medical facilities, and offices. And I love being here and talking about cyber liability because it's a growing concern for all of our businesses. Many of them are now approaching us for the first time saying, hey, I want to get this coverage, but how can I get it? Because there's obviously a compliance component when it comes to buying the coverage. And I'm excited to talk about Scott and get his 2 cents on all these, I'll say, check boxes or lists that the client needs to make sure they have in place nowadays to even get cyber liability. So that's who I am and what we're talking about. Well, Scott, I'm looking at one of the applications here now. And again, this is a cyber liability application. I won't name the carrier on it, but most of these questions are going to be pretty common for all of the carriers in the marketplace today. And again, these are appliance components that the carriers want to understand before they take on a risk. And I'll give a little framework here. So a number of years ago, if you were a business and you wanted cyber liability insurance, you basically just wrote your name on an application and said, yes, please, I would like this much. And they said, great, it's going to cost you several $100s. Here you go. Those days are long gone. Cyber risk and crime is growing exponentially. These carriers have lost considerable amounts of money, and as a result, they're trying to underwrite this risk better. No different than when they ask about a property. Do you have sprinklers? Do you have smoke alarms, smoke detectors? These are all those equivalent questions when it comes to cyber liability. So there's a compliance component. Businesses need to put these measures in place in order to get coverage these days. So many of them turn to me and they say, hey, Mike, I don't know about these. I don't have these things. I'm interested in getting them. How can I get them? And, Scott, I think you're going to be the perfect person to ask when it comes to each of these topics. Are you ready for the challenge?
I'm ready. Let's go.
All right. So the first question, I would say, of any technical knowledge, it says, do you have a commercially available firewall protection? Scott, what is that? Why do they need it? And maybe who are some carriers or companies they could turn to for that?
Well, basically, the firewall is the first line of defense into your network. And that is pretty much a security device that analyzes traffic coming in and out of your network. And it can do security functions such as packet inspection, intrusion prevention. Some can do DNS filtering. Some can do content filtering. And also, you want to have not only intrusion detection, but also intrusion prevention on them. And a lot of those features are only available in like a commercially available firewall that requires an active license that you must purchase from the vendor or who's ever supplying you with that service, with that firewall device. And it usually has, you can usually get for like a year or two term, and then that does need to be renewed. So it's not like just running down to the store and buying, the Netgear off the shelf and just plugging that in, because it may say it's a firewall, but it's not being updated. There's not signatures being updated. Nobody's monitoring that. It's not doing the proper logging in case something happens that you can go back and review what did happen. So those are some of the functions. Now we use Unify devices, which is kind of like a enterprise grade device, but it's at a small business price. So that really made the decision for us. But there's other popular ones out there. Fortinet's a good one. I know Sophos is out there. Cisco Meraki is a popular one for small businesses. And there's even some of the more legacy products like SonicWall and such like that.
Yeah, I've definitely heard some of those names and I've seen them put on the application. So good to understand what it is, what it does. And I would imagine working with someone like DTC, you can help a client put all those things into place for them, correct?
Correct. Yes, that's mandatory. It is a part of our contract. There's no negotiating on that. Like you sign on with us, you get a firewall.
That's good. Tell me about antivirus. That's the second question. It says commercially available antivirus. Is this synonymous with the firewall, or is this a different coverage or protection item altogether?
This is a different protection item altogether. And basically, this is an endpoint protective software. So where the firewall sits at the edge of your network, the antivirus actually gets installed on the device itself. And what that does is that most antiviruses are good for just common threats because they're still out there. Now, antivirus is a wide open field these days because there's such things as MDR, EDR, XDR, all kind of things. And what those do is they bring with it a built-in detection and response to that detection, as opposed to the old school antivirus where it may flag something and quarantine it. This will actively take an action on behalf. Now, some of these products, you need what's called a SOC, which is a security operations center, to back it up, somebody that monitors these alerts and then takes actions on them. Or a lot of times what some businesses will do is they'll run a logging tool that will collect information from those, and then that way they can analyze that as well. So it's a little more complex, and obviously it's going to cost more. But that's another item that we do require. We run a couple different security products. We do run an antivirus and as well as an EDR. And some of those products you'll hear. I mean, the antivirus is the commercial ones you want because somebody is looking at those, monitoring, making sure that they are updated, that they're actually functioning on your computer, that they're not disabled, that the signatures are getting updated. And then plus, if there is an alert, that somebody is looking at those alerts. And then with the EDRs and stuff, that we actually have companies that have security services that look at those alerts. And if it's critical, we will get a phone call and then we will get emails, and then also our ticketing system opens that up. So there's multiple ways that that is being monitored. And a lot of times what the security center will do on like the EDRs and the XDRs is they will take actions on your behalf to mitigate that, such as if it's a malicious aggressive virus or whatever, it may just isolate your computer from the rest of the network just to shut it out so that way it doesn't spread across your network. And that's just an example.
So the firewall hopefully prevents anything from getting in, but the antivirus, should someone or something get in, helps to identify it, isolate it, contain it, and potentially remove it. Is that a correct understanding?
That is a good understanding, yes.
Now, I'm going to ask you a question about viruses. I feel like that was a very prevalent term and topic when I was younger. And today we talk more about ransomware and AI and other type of threats. But, the world of viruses are still pretty relevant and prolific. What are some, I guess, computer viruses you see out there today, and what type of damage could they do to a client's computer?
There's probably the most common one I see is what's known as the emotet or variations of that. That's the most common virus that I see. And usually that one's spread through phishing, where they pretend to be like a common, like I'll use an example. We had an office that was getting a referral from, that was a spoofed email from another office that they get referrals from. And to them, we deal with hundreds of these every day, so it was no big deal. Well, they clicked on it. Well, it spread this virus because it launched in PowerShell. Well, it quickly started to spread across the network. Now that got isolated pretty quick because it got detected. But that is like a banking, I think it's most commonly known for like banking information, financial information is what it really goes after attacks. And then obviously there's ransomware too. And then that is just, there's different variations of that. And what that does is that just basically encrypts your data, generates a key and sends it off to another server that you have to go through the process of getting a decryption or restore from backup. So those are like some of the two common ones. Also, you see I don't want to call them harmless. They are annoying, but the Bitcoin miners are huge as well, where you'll download something off, and usually it's a phishing email, and it'll install a Bitcoin miner. And basically what somebody's doing is just using the resources on your computers to mine Bitcoin for them. So it's just like a botnet for them to make money off of you. So it's not like necessarily malicious in the terms of ransomware, but it's still unwanted software in your network, and it could potentially be a backdoor to something worse down the line.
Sure. That makes complete sense. And, my thought is don't let anyone have insight or access to your information that they shouldn't. And, whether it's Bitcoin mining or a virus, you don't want that on your computers anyhow. Now, let me ask you this. This segues nicely because you brought up phishing. A big question is, do you allow remote access. That is a hot topic here. We've now live in the post-COVID world where many businesses have moved to remote work and they need to allow their employees to have remote access. I'm no different. So the question then is multi-factor authentication. Tell me a little bit about multi-factor authentication and why it's so important and what it does to help these businesses, especially in this offsite or remote access world.
Well, multi-factor authentication is just a means of giving a secondary verification to who you are. So that way, your network verifies that, yeah, you're who you say you are. And the multi-factor authentication can come in multiple ways. It can send you a text message, also known as SMS, or it can send you an email with a code, or a very popular one is the authenticator apps on your phone, where it just generates a random code every 30, 60 seconds that you have to type in. And there's also authentication methods like the hardware keys, like YubiKey, the big one, or biometrics, like a fingerprint reader or, an eye reader, optics reader, or something along those lines. And it is super critical because as threats have evolved, and especially with remote access and the Internet of Things, with cell phones and everything else accessing data, just a username and a password isn't enough anymore, because as soon as they have your account and your password, they have the keys of the kingdom. And at least with a multi-factor authentication and another means of verification, now there's a separate process to verify before it grants access. And so that's why multi-factor authentication is important, I think. And if you have any kind of critical information or personal information that you're trying to protect, you should have multi-factor authentication on that access.
I 100% agree with you. Now, let me ask you this. Is this product or this feature becoming more available? For example, can I turn this on my Gmail? Can I turn it on my Outlook? Are more companies allowing this feature to be added? Or do you need to, I guess, contract with a third party to put a measure in place? Can you weigh in on that a little bit?
Yeah, for most services, they will have multi-factor authentication available for you. Now, Microsoft is going through the process of enforcing it, that it's not optional, which to me is the way it should be. But a lot of them will have it available, they just don't enable it by default. So you need to go in and enable that on your account. But yeah, most companies do, and most services do have it, but there are some where you may need a third-party authenticator like Duo or a service similar to that to have that put in place. And a lot of remote access, depending on what that remote access solution is, especially if you're still using just a plain VPN, you may need a third-party tool like Duo and that infrastructure set up to authenticate through MFA.
That's good insight. I find a lot of my clients, once we start talking about this, because this is one of the biggest questions we get hung up on. Why do I need it? What is it? How do I get it? I typically say, hey, can you talk to your IT provider? Typically nowadays, you can just turn these things on. Maybe there's a very small cost component or none at all, depending on what you use. And it's a big one for the emails, because my understanding, Scott, is if the bad guy gets your email address, it's all over, because that's where if you click reset password, okay, we're going to send an email to you to click to reset your password. So that's one of the most highly prized access points, and protecting that with MFA is critical. Is that correct?
Oh, that is absolutely correct, because I don't think most people realize how much information is available just through their email, and all the branching information out to just your clients as well. And their information is now compromised if somebody gets access to that email, because there's, a lot of personal and financial information that's sent through email. Now, some of that, hopefully people are sending through encrypted email that requires a separate access for that, but still, business email should definitely have MFA on it.
Perfect. Let me ask you this. You brought up the topic of encryption, and that brings me to my next question about backups, backing up your information, backing up your computer systems, and then potentially encrypting those backups. These are questions on the application. They're certainly relevant to the underwriters and carriers. Can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. Because in the event of ransomware, one of the things that ransomware is obviously going to do, and is if a malicious actor is present on your network, the first thing they're going to do is look for your backups and either encrypt those or just delete them. So if that is segregated from your network, and also if it's encrypted, and then now we send all of our data resides separate from like the domain network. So it's segregated our backups, and the backup software does encrypt that data. And then we send it off through encrypted traffic to a cloud provider that stores it in an encrypted manner as well. So basically, it prevents somebody from opening up your backup and being able to use that data, is what the encryption does. Is if they would perchance get their hands on your backup data, they would have to decrypt it, which, depending on the level of encryption, is going to take them quite a few years.
And the value in that is twofold. One, you don't want them to delete everything, so then they have you extra hostage. They really have you. And then two, if you can protect it, let's say you do remove the infiltrator, the bad guy off your computer, the virus, what have you, restoring files, getting the system back up to speed is a far easier and much faster process. Is that correct?
Absolutely. It depends. I mean, there's a lot of different backup solutions out there. We offer two different ones. One's kind of just like a file and folder offload to, a cloud provider backup. Or we have ones that run hourly. So that way our recovery point, is within the past hour should something happen. And even if it's just an accidental deletion by an employee or something, we can go back and just pull that within the past hour of that data to cut down the amount of time lost. But yes, certainly in the event of data loss or an event, then the sooner you can get back up, the less money you're going to lose.
Well, Scott, it's been great talking to you. These were some of the questions that I often get phone calls on from my clients saying, "Hey, Mike, I have this. Does that mean I have a firewall? I have this. Does that mean I have antivirus?" And I often will turn to someone like yourself and say, "Scott, this is what my client tells me. Do they have this?" And it's often a yes or a no. So it's good to understand, hey, what are these things? Where can I go to get them if I'm a business owner? Why are they important and relevant? And how do they play into all this? Because, I'm looking at the application now. It's 8 pages. A few years ago, it was probably 2 pages. It wouldn't surprise me in a few more years if we're up to 16 pages. As these carriers want to offer a product to the businesses, but they need to really understand how are these businesses protecting themselves in this digital landscape, because there can be a lot on the line, and fixing an issue, indemnifying a client, making this all go away costs significant dollars these days. So that's where we fit in. I know if someone wants to work with you, you require cyber liability. I think that's a growing trend in the world. And anyone who listens to this podcast as a business owner, if you're going through this, hopefully you got some quality information out there. And if you have questions when filling out an app, you can call myself or Scott and we'll walk you through it, because hopefully we impressed upon you. We understand this and look at this every day.
Indeed. And then just as a final note here, it's obvious from this discussion what a hand in glove looks like, that there is no way a business is going to be able to operate independent of the two of you working together to protect them. And it's a wonderful thing that you're out there. It's sad that you has to come to this, but it is wonderful to know that these resources are available, and there's such people like yourselves that really stay on top of what is the meaning behind this. How does this impact a business owner on a practical standpoint? So, Scott, Mike, I really do appreciate you taking a little time out today to explain this to our audience, because this is critical going forward. It's something you cannot ignore, obviously, in this day and age.
Yeah, my pleasure, Andrew. Thanks for having us.
Yep, thank you.
We would love to hear from you. Please email us your questions or comments to askus@dtctoday.com. New episodes of Cyber Savvy are posted the second Tuesday of every month. For more detailed information, visit our website at dtctoday.com. Be prepared. Be cyber savvy.